Musical chairs. All right, our next speakers are Palwasha L. Kakar, who's the director for the Religion and Peacebuilding program at CSID, which I've learned is in the process of being resurrected. And along with a second presenter, whose name unfortunately didn't make it to the program, Mohammad O. Are you here? Okay, very good. Who is a PhD candidate at George Mason University. And they will be speaking on the topic of the evolution of authoritarianism in the Muslim world, from governance principles to autocratic rule.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of the Creator, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise is due to the compassionate Creator. Distinguished scholars, guests, and friends, Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. I'm Palwasha Kakar, and I direct the religion program at the United States Institute of Peace, which is the oldest thematic at the Institute of Peace. I'm happy to say that we have now won our case and we are supposed to be back in business. I'm joined with my colleague, Ustad Mohammad O. I've been working with him for over 20 years in this space. And although he is now a PhD candidate, he was also a senior advisor at U.S. Institute of Peace, working with me on governance and also on women's rights in Islam. Before that, he was working in very important positions in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, both in education and in religious affairs. And this presentation really stems from our joint research that we did when the peace talks were happening in Afghanistan. And we heard that the Taliban were talking about an Islamic Nizam, and the Republic was saying we already have an Islamic system of government. Our constitution is one of the most Islamic constitutions in the world. And so there was this bafflement of misunderstanding of what is Islamic government and governance, and a lack of understanding people to be on the same page on these concepts. And so we embarked on this research to better understand how to speak and have some white papers in the background about Islamic governance from the original sources, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. I don't have a clicker, so maybe. So through this presentation, we'll talk about the principles that we did research on for the peace process. And then we'll also look at some of the historical deviations. My colleague will do that. And then finally look at the principles and how they're so relevant today. We'll do that in these three sections. So for the first section, we'll look at the principles governing ethical leadership. We'll look at the principles empowering citizen participation and the principles on mutual accountability and the social contract. Ethical leadership focuses on moral character and responsible authority. Citizenship participation is centered on public rights and political engagement, and mutual accountability emphasizes shared responsibilities. There's been a lot of reference to the Medina Constitution and to other references in the Quran, so I'll try to go quickly through some of these topics because I believe all of you are very well aware of them. But I think the way we've organized them have been helpful when we're talking about governance and also in comparison with principles of good governance that are the common parlance today when we talk about governance in peace building and development work. So in terms of the foundational principles, the first thing we emphasize is looking at stewardship in the Quran. And so the whole concept of the Khalifa is basically the beginning of understanding the importance of human beings and their role on earth as being stewards and representatives but having the responsibility to take action and be leaders. Next slide. Okay, so we first talked about trust or amana. I think when I was first taught the importance of amana, it was more in terms of what's entrusted to me, rather than thinking of amana as leadership and trust. So leadership can also be a trust of people, and it has this moral responsibility, and it's a privilege. And I think the story of Abu Bakr, who, when he was chosen as a caliph, really stands out to explain this dynamic that's described in the Quranic verses that we have up on the screen. He stood before the people when he was elected, and he said, "I've been appointed over you, but I am not the best among you. Help me if I do right, and correct me if I do wrong." And that really set the ethical tone of leadership based on public trust and not personal entitlement. Next slide. The second is a very important issue that was raised before on justice and rule of law. Justice, or adl, is a divine command and ethical backbone of Islamic governance. It's important to uphold justice even against ourselves, and that's been brought up many times before. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized equality before the law. One story of the Caliph Ali radiallahu anhu, who really stands out as an example of how this really can be enforced and implemented. And that is when he lost a court case to a Jewish citizen. He took a Jewish man to court over a shield, and the judge ruled in favor of the non-Muslim because the Caliph Ali had no witnesses. That moment really became a lesson in equality before the law, that is, even the ruler is held to the same system. Next slide. Meritocracy and wisdom, that is hikmah. The verses on leadership and trust also talk about giving it to people who deserve it, entrusting responsibility to those who are capable. And wisdom is also key in effective governance. The Prophet ﷺ and Omar who exemplified this meritocracy by prioritizing integrity and capable appointments. There are many examples of how people were changed in the government when there was a more capable person that came to Omar who was recommended. And the Prophet ﷺ also refused to appoint people who requested a leadership role rather than had the merits of being a leader. Next slide. So now we're getting to the second, the citizen rights and responsibilities, consultation and public consent. Public consent in Islam is about shura, and the emphasis is on shura, that is consultation and collective affairs. My brother, John Pinot, spoke about shura before, and it's not just about consultation, and as my brother Salam also mentioned, in terms of just the social contract, but it also was used as a way to appoint and elect representatives and leaders. There was through consultation, and then through a process of bay'ah, or pledging allegiance, that confirms the consent that caliphs were elected. In the rightly guided caliphs in the first four, that's a very important example. And many scholars after that declared that leadership that was established without that kind of consultation was illegitimate. Unfortunately, we have scholars that wrote about justifying authoritarian regimes, and we don't hear as much about, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa, who was jailed because he refused to recognize the leader that was illegitimate and not brought through public consultation. The next is on civic accountability. Citizens, are we on the next one? Okay. We're talking about public consultation and public consent and civic accountability. The whole concept of Amr bil Maruf and Nahi anil Munkar is to enjoin right and forbid wrong. That is to speak truth to power. And we have so many examples of this. It's about the people speaking out. And it's a duty of the people to speak out, not in terms of the government imposing this. A quick example was during the time of the Caliph Omar, when a woman spoke out and said during a public sermon that he was wrong about limiting dowry, and he accepted her correction, saying this woman is right and Omar is wrong. The next is on the protection of rights and minorities, and we already heard about that in the Constitution of Medina that was spoken about earlier, so I won't speak to that. The last section is about mutual accountability and the social contract, and I think it's just important to note here that legitimacy is not static, that there are examples of how people had to continue to show legitimacy and that authority was not granted once and for all. And during Uthman's caliphate, he sent envoys to request the renewal of Bay'ah. This wasn't ceremonial. It was important to continue to show legitimacy of the leaders. And finally, on corruption and monitoring, there are examples of how the Prophet ﷺ forbade governors from accepting gifts, and that there was continual audits, and particularly under Omar radiallahu anhu, there was a continuous auditing and holding officials accountable. So these are all examples of very clear ways that Islam lays out governance structures that are accountable to the people, that are in consultation, that have leadership and ethical leadership that are in line very much so with how we understand current day governance systems. And these were helpful as we were working through discussing peacebuilding. Tariq sir will be talking about the second half of this presentation, which is authoritarianism and extremism. So that's how we'll
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Good morning, yes. I will continue with the authoritarianism, rise of extremism in war and terror. It is a very long period starting from 662 until now. It's very difficult to cover, but I will be very short on going through. The important things that we already heard about it, that's the principle of governance. However, I will call it golden principle of governance because it is relevant to all good governance in the history of human being, from Yusuf alayhi salam to Musa alayhi salam to Dawood alayhi salam to Sulaiman alayhi salam, everyone. For that reason, this is not something only came in Quran, and we have to follow it as Muslim, but it is golden principle coming with فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. From that part with Adam alayhi salam, the father of all human. And that's the reason that these golden principles are implemented during the 40 years of Prophet's statehood and the 30 years of Khulaf. According to the saying of Prophet, peace be upon him, 30 years the Khilafah will continue. After that, the autocrats will come, the kings. And that's where this authoritarianism stops. In another hadith narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari, it says that the fasad corruption of this ummah will be done by the hand of few younger Quraysh. And that's another saying, which is a forecast of Prophet Muhammad about the governance. Then, with what this started, let's talk about the content. The content is that the golden principle of governance was reversed by these people. First of all, they didn't call themselves Khalifa, as it is very famous from Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. When he was asked, he said, Ana awwal al-muluk. He didn't say Ana awwal al-Khalifa or Ana Khalifa.
Going down.
The other narration is from Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu. When he came to meet Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, he told him, Ya ayyuha al-malik. He didn't tell him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen or Khalifa. The other indication is the book written by Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, called Kitab al-Kharaj. He only mentioned the example of good governance in the reform proposal that he submitted to Harun al-Rashid, the king of Abbasi. 5. Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, Ali radiallahu anhu, and Omar ibn Abdul Aziz, the Khalifa al-Khamis. There is no other Khalifa. They're all authoritarian. And the best example is, I told someone that these Umayyad Abbasid dynasty until now, even Ottoman Empire, they were all fighting not for Islam, but fighting for wealth and conquest. He told me, no, you are not right. I said, I'm right, because in Iraq, during the Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, non-Muslim people, which called Ma'ahid or Zimmi, they become Muslim. Then the officers of Hajjaj reported to him that the jizya this year is very low. We are in deficit. Let's do something. What happened? Because many of those people who we were taking jizya, they became Muslim. Then he ordered them to take them out of the cities to the villages and took jizya from them. It means to tell them you are not Muslim. If this was for Islam, then why they didn't care about those people? The other important point, I was warned about my time, as this is 200 pages research done by Afghan scholars. We are just talking in 10 minutes. The other point is that the policy of government started to kind of people have to be taken to illiteracy. It means education has to go. And the reason was because those people from Tabi'in and Tabi'in and others, they had a lot of knowledge of Islam. And they didn't accept this illegitimate government, as Imam Abu Hanifa called it, bil-fi'l, hukuma, or la mashru'. Then they started to think, the kings, that if we have people know Islam, they will always revolt against us. For that reason, make them uneducated. Then they start to not have education department at all. And that was another. Especially, they were very hard on women. And their policy was to put them in houses and then not let them to learn. Because the women were very hard on criticizing the kings and autocrats. There are many examples. You can go to the book of Ibn Bakr called Al-Mawfaqiyat. There are hundreds of examples of this. I will stop here, then we'll be in your service during the question and answer.